if I, flew into town and went to bed at about 1 a.m. and I had to be up at 5, that meant I'd get 4 hours of sleep. That's sleep deprivation. If, however, I got into bed at 10 p.m. and then I got really anxious about this big interview I had with Hala and did not fall asleep till about 1 o'clock in the morning and then woke up at 5, now I'd still be getting about 4 hours of sleep, but that's insomnia.
You're watching Young and Profiting Podcast on YouTube. Welcome to the show. I'm your host, Hala Taha, and on Young and Profiting Podcast, we investigate a new topic each week and interview some of the brightest minds in the world. Before we get started, hit the subscribe button and don't forget to click the bell icon to be notified every time we drop a new video. Hi, Dr. Meeta. Welcome to Young and Profiting Podcast.
Hala, thank you for having me. Thank you for giving me a platform.
Of course. That's what we're here for. I love the topic of sleep. In fact, sleep is one of our most popular topics that we cover on Young and Profiting Podcast. We had Dr. Daniel Gartenberg back in episode number 12, and he was actually one of our most popular episodes. So just really excited to dive deeper and see if we can uncover some new gems for our listeners. Before we do that, I do want to introduce you to our listeners. So you are a world famous sleep coach. You've coached CEOs like David Meltzer, who's been on the podcast a couple of times already. You also coach sports teams, NFL, NBA, MLB, you name it. And you even have a World Series champion ring, which is huge. We'll get into that later. So you know everything about sleep. You worked at the Henry Ford Sleep Center as well. So can't wait to pick your brain. But we always like to kind of get background on our guests at first. And so I'd love to understand, how you got into sports, how you got into sleep. From my understanding, you were never into sports as a kid. You were quite nerdy, and that's how you ended up going into medicine. But I'd love to understand the evolution, what you've done, why you are a sleep expert.
So first of all, I'm not surprised that sleep is so popular. We spend a third of our life sleeping, Hala, a third. And so, oftentimes almost everybody has some issue. And so it's such a fascinating subject, right? Everybody wants to learn something about it. Now, for my background, so I am a sleep medicine doctor. I did my training in psychiatry at the Mayo Clinic, and then I came to the Henry Ford Health System to do a training. I did a fellowship in sleep medicine, and for many, many years, I've actually been in clinical practice there. And So, all along, I've always wanted to work with optimizing sleep with the goal of optimizing performance. And it was really easy because I was based in the greater Detroit area in Michigan, and we have the car companies, and they often travel, they're jet lagged, etc. So I was helping with them. And of course, sports just happened by happenstance. I heard something on the radio that somebody was like a so-called sleep expert was talking about what they were suggesting to the local NFL team. And I cold called the team physician for the NFL team. And I was like, well, that's complete bullshit. And he said, well, why don't you come and give us a talk? And that was about 8 or 9 years ago. And, so I started with people start at all levels. Sports has this, it's called the Fort Knox effect, which is like, it's really difficult to get in. But once you get in, and if you do good work, then it's easy to get ahead. And so once I started with the local NFL team and I talked to them, and, the team physician also worked in Major League Baseball. So I started working with them, and then the NBA teams, and then the NHL. And, I've done some work for international soccer. I've done some work for cricket. I've done some work in Major League soccer in the US. And actually, I just got, about 3 weeks ago, I got asked to work with the US soccer, the women's national team, which is going to the Olympics. And they're the number one soccer team in the world right now in women's. And so it's really cool. It is. It's awe-inspiring and it's humbling at the same time. It's scary, but it's exhilarating. It's just a fantastic field to be in. And then, when I started working with professional sports, the parallel is that people who are C-suite executives, top CEOs live the exact same life. I mean, they're like gladiators, right? They always want to be at their level best. And one of the things that suffers a lot is the fact that they're not sleeping. And I remember that when I met David, I think I met him about 4 or 5 years ago, he said, everything is going so well in my life. I sleep really poorly. And so one of the things I was doing is, so when you work in sports, people, you look at any skill, you have a coach who looks at that skill, sees if you're doing it correctly, gives you the how-to tools on a one-on-one basis. And basically that's what I did with David. And, I mean, and it's just word of mouth, because if you do good work with one person, it sort of
I can totally relate. You know, it's all about, I love the fact that you cold emailed someone when you heard somebody on the radio and you're like, I could do better than this. And that's so like me. I do the same thing. And to your point, when you're good at your job, it just becomes referrals, and you don't really even have to do advertising. If you have strong relationships with your clients, you'll never have to do an ad in your life because you just get referred and referred. Same thing with me. So I totally can relate there. Let's talk about the main topic of today. Let's talk about sleep, because there's so much to cover and I really want to get some actionable insights from my listeners. So from my understanding, you were the medical director at Henry Ford Sleep Center, and over there you really focused on sleep disorders. So first of all, what are some of the sleep disorders that we need to know about?
Now I'm doing the exact same work, but under my own flag. But for almost 15 or 16 years, I've been the medical director and the service chief at the Henry Ford Sleep Lab here. So sleep medicine as a field is rather young. So it's about 35 years old. And when, a sleep physician like I am board certified and, fellowship trained to evaluate and diagnose any sort of sleep disorder and then treat it. And typically when people come to me, they have either they have difficulty initiating on sleep or maintaining sleep at night, or they're too sleepy or tired during the day, or while they're asleep, there's something going on that they're not even aware of. So, people who snore loudly, who may have sleep apnea, who may have, they may kick their legs a lot at night, and that might disrupt their sleep, and that results in excessive sleepiness during the day. So those are the kind of patients I see, or I see in my clinical practice.
Really interesting. Okay, so like sleep apnea and insomnia, I guess those are two really big ones, right?
Yes.
And so I know that you mentioned earlier, we need to spend 1/3 of our lives sleeping, or we typically spend 1/3 of our lives sleeping. That's a long time. And so why is sleep so important? Because we always hear like you need 7 to 9 hours of sleep. What does sleep impact for those who don't know?
That is an excellent question. And I think that the best way to start for your audience would be to give them a little bit of background, right? So when you're asleep, Hala, your brain is disengaged from the environment as well as unresponsive, right? And because your brain is disengaged, it forces both your brain and your body to rest. Now, so unless sleep had some absolutely essential function, it would be a colossal wastage of time. So imagine, while you're asleep, you can't protect yourself. You cannot procreate. You can't eat food, or, you can't get nutrition in. It has to be serving some essential purpose. Otherwise, it would be evolution's biggest mistake. And in fact, now we know that sleep affects every physiological function. And, so every physiological function that you have is affected if you don't get enough sleep. So we can start with the head, right? We know sleep exists deep in the brain. So you need sleep to pay attention to something, for your reaction time. You need sleep for good judgment. So, if you don't get enough sleep, if you wake up in the morning, you're that part of the brain that's responsible for good judgment, multitasking, creativity, good decision making gets impaired while you're while the emotional part of your brain becomes overactive. And can you imagine, like, there is no other field, there's no job that people can do in which that would be a good thing. That has to be something that people want to avoid. For people like you, Hala, creativity is really important. And that aspect of creativity in which you take in new information, put it together with previously stored information, and then come up with new solutions or, novel ideas, that happens while you're sleeping. So, it's so important. So any information you take in during the day, memory consolidation happens at night. And so that was just the brain. But in fact, and, the other thing I would say, mental health is, so sleep has this bi-directional relationship with mental health. So if you don't get enough sleep, you're likely to be grumpier, you're more anxious, less likely to be able to cope with the stresses of the next day. And if you can't cope with these stresses, then you're going to be more anxious, and that's going to be a bad thing. And of course, if you go down the body, your heart, your liver, your kidneys, every organ you have has to have that nightly reset in which it prepares for functioning the next day. And that's what happens when you're sleeping.
It's so interesting how sleep literally impacts everything. It seems like it impacts everything. And you wouldn't suspect that the way you sleep might impact the way you perform at work. Yes. But it drastically does, drastically does. So what is the proper amount of sleep that everybody should get? Because there are some people out there that claim they can sleep on 2 to 4 hours a night, and like, is that like BS? Like, is there a different amount per person? Does it depend on your profession? How much sleep should we get?
Okay. So the simple answer is that according to the American Academy of Sleep Medicine, adults need 7 to 9 hours of sleep. There is, of course, some human variability, right? So somebody may need a little bit more, somebody may need a little less. But if you're getting less than 6 hours of sleep, you're likely to be impaired. But here's the funny part. And that might explain why people say that, I can get by with less sleep. So one of the things that happens when you get less sleep on a chronic basis, so instead of getting if you need about 8 hours, and instead of 8 hours, you're getting 6.5 hours every day. And so your sleep that sleep deprivation, it sort of accumulates.
Well, if you get used to it, right?
Yes, exactly. So that self-perception of knowing how sleepy you are, you lose that. So your judgment gets impaired. So it's very much like, when you're drinking alcohol, the person who's drinking is the last person you should be asking whether they're fit to drive. Similarly, if you're getting less sleep on a chronic basis, your perception of how much sleep you need is really off, and your judgment is off. So I'm not surprised they say that they can get by with less sleep. So, of course, there's some variability, but that's the answer.
Yeah, that's really interesting because I know what you mean. For a long time, I worked in corporate and I had this podcast. And so I had a very busy life where I would get like 5 hours of sleep, honestly, every night, max, sometimes 4 hours. I was really unhealthy at that time because I was just trying to make things happen, and to your point, once I quit my full-time job and became an entrepreneur and started getting more sleep, I'm like, wow, I feel so much better now that I'm getting all this sleep. Like I felt like a new person, like just so much more energetic and so much quicker. So it is true. Like you just get used to not getting enough sleep. So be careful. Don't just become a chronic non-sleeper, right?
I gotta say one thing. I mean, so an entrepreneur, one of the things they do is they look at ideas and see whether those ideas are, are they valid ideas? Are they ideas that are going to be useful? Well, you need judgment for that, right? And if you don't get enough sleep, your judgment is impaired. And there's been studies that show that the ability to tell whether an idea or a business idea is viable or not is affected by how much sleep you're getting. And the other thing I say is that, things like and especially amongst the people that I work with. So, when it comes to top athletes or, CEOs, their emotional intelligence makes a big difference to how they're going to operate, right? Whether they have empathy, whether they have the ability to connect with people, whether they have the ability to motivate and inspire other people. That all of that, all those functions, Hala, are a function of a well-rested brain. You can't really get there if you don't get enough sleep. And the other thing is that, because most of the athletes, I work with are elite athletes. These elite athletes, one thing that, to be an elite athlete, you need to be able to recognize your emotions. And you need to be able to regulate those emotions while you're playing. So, everybody can play really, really well while you're practicing. But when you're out on the field or when you're on that, court and it's the NBA game 5 going on, you can listen, you have all that pressure of your coach, your family members, the fans, etc. To be able to keep your cool then, that is what differentiates you from, another elite athlete. And that's what gives you that competitive edge. And guess what? Every step of that emotional regulation, that is what sleep is important for. So if you don't get enough sleep, that gets dysregulated. And I always tell people when I'm working with them, I remind them of that. You're very young, you may not even remember. I don't know if you remember that story of Mike Tyson. He was in a fight.
When he bit the ear?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So when he bit the ear, first of all, he immediately he got fined $3 million. And he couldn't play or he couldn't fight for another year, right? So that's, that decision in which, somebody said something, he got angry and, he decided to pay attention to the situation. And then that decision making of whether he should respond or walk away, that sort of split second decision, that's what gets impaired if you don't get enough sleep.
So interesting.
Yeah,
it's very, very interesting. I'd love to understand kind of like the science behind it. There's a couple things that really piqued my interest. The fact that you said that creativity is really impacted by how much sleep you get. And then also the judgment, decision making. What's like the science behind all of that? Like, why does it get impacted if you get less sleep?
So what we know right now is we can tell because when you get in sleep deprivation studies, that the part of the brain that are responsible for good decision making, judgment, etc., they get impaired. Like they're not lighting up as much as while the amygdala, which is the emotional brain, is overactive. So that's the first step in these research studies. In the second research studies, then these experiments are designed in which people are either they're sleep deprived or at another time they get enough sleep, and then their judgment is measured. And in fact, there's this really interesting story from Harvard. And what they found is that when sleep-deprived individuals are given stimulants like caffeine or modafinil, there are drugs out there that can increase your reaction time. Well, they get less sleepy. Their reaction time improves. They become faster and more accurate. But the one thing that doesn't get affected is their judgment. So they just continue to make bad decisions faster. And so, So another way to think about it is, so think about sleep. So sleep occurs deep in the brain, and typically what happens while you're sleeping is that there is, memories are played, and they may be played at faster rates. There is pruning of unnecessary information. There are more connections and circuits being formed of information that you need. There's also this function during your sleep that while you're asleep, blood rushes through your brain like a power wash, and it washes out all the toxins that have accumulated during the day. And so it's, the simplest way to explain it would be to think of it as a nightly reset button. So it's the same thing that happens to a machine, right? Whenever you have a machine, you have to give it some downtime so that it can recover, so they can do the work again the next day. So think of it as like a nightly investment for optimal functioning the next day.
I love that analogy. And I think it's so key to know more about sleep and to care about sleep when you spend so much time sleeping. And I feel like this is sort of, like you said, it's like 30 years old, your field. It's just this new thing that people are starting to pay attention to, which I think is really cool. And I think there's lots of space in here to create innovation, to create companies, money, like all this, like it's a great field to kind of look at, because I think it's really emerging. So let's talk about athletes. Since we're on the topic of athletes, do athletes need more sleep than other people?
Well, so most athletes are young adults. So there are studies in which these are sleep extension studies done on Stanford athletes and college athletes, and what they did is over a period of six weeks they made sure they were spending 9 to 10 hours in bed, and they found there was improvement in in their reaction time in the actual game. So in basketball players, their 3-point field goals, and so the actual game improved. In football players, they shaved off some time of their 40-yard dash. Then in swimmers, they were swimming faster. In tennis players, their serve accuracy improved. So there was actual improvement in their performance. And so since most people are walking around with a sleep debt, right? They're not getting enough sleep. So for athletes, we say on a regular basis, getting 9 to 10 hours is really, really important. And Hala, this is not new information. So Dr. Timothy Rears used to be one of my colleagues at the Henry Ford Center, and they would do these studies in the late 80s, and they looked at optimal alertness, and they found that to be optimally alert the next day, some of these young adults, they needed 9 or 10 hours of sleep. And what do athletes want to do? They want to be optimally alert. And so there is a school of thought that says that because you're an athlete and because you want to perform at your level best, you need more sleep than somebody else. So I always tell people that, sleep does not make you a better athlete. But if you're already, no amount of sleep is going to make me a basketball player. However, when you're an elite athlete and you have those abilities and your competitors are also elite athletes, then that getting enough sleep gives you that competitive edge.
Yeah.
And they're always looking for that little extra that will put them over the edge as compared to their competitors.
Yeah, this is like so interesting to me. So let's talk about ways that we can improve our sleep. So I'm always looking for ways to maximize my time. So I'm wondering, can you get deeper sleep and then save on the amount of time that you're sleeping? Like, is there levels of sleep? Can you explain those levels of sleep? Absolutely. And if we get really deep sleep, can we sleep less and get the same benefits, or no?
So you're absolutely right. There are different levels or stages of sleep. Now, I have to explain, you have to know that these stages of sleep are artificial because scientists have, looked at what your brain waves look like while you're asleep and decided, well, this is stage 1, N1, N2, stage 3 or deep sleep and REM sleep, right? So it is artificial. It's from outside. But typically, people fall into sleep through light sleep, which is stage N1. Then they have some amount of N2 sleep, which is slightly deeper sleep. Then they have N3 or deep sleep or delta sleep. And then they have some amount of dream sleep or REM sleep. And then they wake up, and that's an approximately 90-minute cycle. Now, light sleep, first of all, every stage of sleep serves some function. So you really can't get rid of one versus the other. That's the first, that would be my first point. Deep sleep or delta sleep is the most restorative. And if you were regularly not getting enough sleep, then whenever you play catch up, your brain realizes, well, I have to recuperate the fact that this person has not been getting enough sleep, and your brain will consume more deep sleep then. So you really don't need to, you really can't artificially, or you don't need to artificially increase the stage.
You can't like hack it. I can't be like, I want more REM sleep today.
Well, so there are devices out there. There are things out there that say it can get you better deep sleep. What I'd like to see is a study that shows that, getting sleep this way is better than just normal sleep. Right? So I would say the benefit of that would be maybe in people who have, who are older, who naturally don't get enough deep sleep. So as you get older, as you age, the amount of deep sleep decreases. So that would be a good population to try this study to see if increasing their deep sleep would actually help. So anyway, but so deep sleep is where your blood pressure is low, your heart rate is low, everything sort of relaxes. It's the most restorative part. If your muscles relax, so that it sort of restores. It's where growth hormone gets secreted. So it's kind of good for an athlete. It's good for all of us. Now, dream sleep happens. And what dream sleep, usually occurs in the second half of the night. And dream sleep is where emotional context is added to your memories. And so it also serves some, completely vital function. So I tell people that since every stage of sleep is a percentage of the total amount of sleep, the best thing you can do, Hala, is to make sure you get enough time in bed. I know that's kind of bad news because I know you're trying to, because you're very, very busy. But the other way to look at it is that, and again, I think that you will relate because you're very busy. And, some of the CEOs and C-suite executives or athletes I work with are exactly in the same boat, right? They want to maximize the number of hours that they're working. But smart work doesn't always mean working longer. It means being more effective, right? So effective work is when you can get work done. And, one of the things that happens when you get less sleep is there's this concept of presenteeism in which you're present, but you're not giving it your level best. And that's something, you want to avoid that. So it's no use if you're going to be up and you can't even really pay attention, you can't read what's written in front of you, and you're reading the same line again and again, and, or you're tired and you're grumpy and you're,
making bad decisions, like you said before.
With your making poor relationship decisions with the team that you work with. So when it comes to making sure you get enough sleep, I think, I would say common sense, small, simple things can make a big difference. So first of all, be mindful about the amount of caffeine you're drinking.
I was just going to bring up caffeine because I know that you're not really the biggest proponent of caffeine. And tell me about it.
I will tell you, caffeine is very effective. It is performance enhancing, but when done correctly. So one of the things that happens is if you drink caffeine on a regular basis, so if you drink 1 cup every day, in 3 weeks or so, you're going to need 1.5 cups for the same effect. And you develop tolerance, and then and when you stop using it, you can get withdrawals. And so if you want to use it when you actually need it. So you want to use it very strategically. But when it comes to sleep, is if you drink it too close to your bedtime, then it's going to make it difficult for you to go to sleep. So half-life is about 5 to 6 hours. And so if you drink a double espresso before you go to bed, well, guess what? You're going to sleep poorly. And sometimes some people are so sleep deprived that it doesn't matter. They'll still fall asleep. But then in that case, they won't get enough deep sleep. So what good is that doing? So monitor how much caffeine you're drinking, especially, a lot of people will work out in the evenings. So some of your energy drinks, pre or post workout drinks may contain caffeine. So you want to pay attention to that. The second thing I would say is pay attention to alcohol use. So alcohol, it may help you fall asleep faster, but then it disrupts your sleep as the night progresses. So that's not a good thing. Again, similarly, be careful about nicotine or any such thing. The third thing, of course, is just, electronic use.
Yeah.
So it's and especially, if for somebody who's really busy, maybe working with clients who are all over the world, working at different time zones, and then you feel that you always have to stay connected, keep your cell phone on or your email on all the time. Well, you're not going to get good sleep. So there's actually a study, Hala. It was done in training doctors, I think, and what it's found is that if you're on call and your phone's next to you, even if you don't get called the entire night, you don't sleep very well because that anticipation that you're going to get called. And I'm sure that you have people, people who relate to that they always feel that somebody might be pinging them, somebody might be, trying to get in touch with them. And so for that reason, electronics might not be a very good idea.
Super interesting. So I just want to dig deeper on the caffeine coffee thing and just make sure I got this right. So you don't recommend that, most people wake up and first thing they do is make a cup of coffee. You don't recommend making it a part of your routine like that. You recommend using coffee when you just need it?
Yeah, no, you can definitely drink caffeine. I love drinking coffee.
Me too.
You can make it a regular part of your schedule. If you want to do it, you can do it in the morning. You can do it, a couple of hours after you wake up, whatever. There are different schools of thought. What I would say is that if you need caffeine to get through your day and you can't get through the day without caffeine, that should be a sign to you that you need to do something about your sleep. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Now, for athletes, and a lot of good athletes will do that. On a regular basis, they may have a couple of, they may have a cup of coffee in the morning, but they will drink that additional cup in the evening or a caffeine energy drink in the evening only before their game because they know they need that extra energy. That is a strategic way of using caffeine. If you were traveling and you were jet lagged, then strategically using caffeine at certain times to make sure you were alert, that would be the right thing to do.
Well, since you brought up jet lag, I'd love for you to explain what jet lag is. And then also something that you specifically talk about. I think you coined this social jet lag. I'd love to hear about both of those two things.
Yes. So let's back up. And for your audience, let's explain to them what a circadian clock or a biological clock is.
Sure. That's a great place.
So now, since we live on this rotating rock, and because we have alternating night and dark, so all organisms, including human beings, we've developed cellular clocks. So for us, Hala, for you, I, and most adults, we have a clock in our brain. And the clock is an intrinsic timekeeping clock. And it's about approximately, circa means approximately 24 hours. And so even though it's intrinsic, on a daily basis, it's reset by exposure to light and dark. So since I'm in Michigan, when I wake up in the morning, so my clock is set to Michigan time. So that's what happens. Now, so it's synchronized to the local time zone. And so in addition to that clock in the brain, in fact, every cell in your body and every physiological function has a circadian clock. So there's a certain time where some functions, they peak, and there's a certain time that they tend to ebb. And so that clock in your brain is like a master conductor, and and then all the other clocks in every other cell, they're keeping time, and the master conductor they all sort of coordinate. I mean, that's what you want them to do. And you want it so every cell has a clock, because a cell has to have timing, because a cell can't grow and die at the same time. A cell, there has to be a time where it takes in nutrition, utilizes the nutrition, is active and is resting. So the cell also has to have timed functions. Okay, that was my history lesson. I'm done with that. No, it's just my science lesson. I'm done with that. So now, so we have this clock in our brain. It's synchronized to your local time. If you took a jet and you rapidly crossed time zones and you got to a new time zone, your clock would be out of sync at the new time zone. So if I took a plane from here and I flew to London, which is 5 hours ahead of me, I would have difficulty initiating sleep at the London time. I would have difficulty maintaining sleep, and I would be sleepy during the day. And, and I'd have GI stomach upset, because all my clocks would be scrambling to get in sync with the new time zone. That is what jet lag is. And then social jet lag, which is what most people do, is when during the weekday or your work week, you go to bed at a certain time and you wake up. But then so supposing on a work week, you go to bed about 11 and you get out of bed at 7, right? Or midnight and 7 in the morning. But then here comes the weekend, and instead of going to bed at midnight, you go to bed at 3 in the morning. And then you sleep until noon. right? That is like, and you do that every weekend. And then, and of course, on Sunday night, it's more difficult for you to go back to sleep on your regular time because you've been going to bed so late. But so without taking a plane, it's like you've taken a plane and you've flown to California every weekend. And that's why it's called social jet lag. And people do this on a regular basis. And what they found is that, when people do this, it has detrimental effects on your cardiometabolic health. So that's not good for you.
So I'm assuming you should try to keep a regular routine even through the weekend. And then any tips for if we have jet lag, or how to kind of counteract that or get ourselves more acclimated once we, if we're on business travel and we have to do a good job and we can't really be jet lagged for a few days. Like, what do you recommend?
Right. So first of all, let's back up, and I want to tell you something. When you talked about, regularity, the one thing that we have that your circadian clock does, Hala, is it also decides whether you're a morning lark or you're a night owl or you're an intermediate person, right? So, so let me just ask you, I'm going to put you on the spot here. What time do you prefer to go to bed? If you didn't have anywhere to go, what time would you like to go to sleep?
Oh my gosh, I'm definitely a night owl. Okay. So I would say like 1 a.m. is usually when I fall asleep every night.
And what time?
It's really hard for me to shut off.
If you didn't have anywhere to go, what time would you like to wake up?
9 a.m.
9 a.m. So 1 to 9. So you're definitely a night owl, right? Now, in contrast, I'm a morning person. So I like to go to bed between, say, 9:30. And then I like to wake up at 5 in the morning. So I want your audience to understand what that means. So for example, when the clock says midnight on the wall, midnight for me is the middle of the night. For you, it's not even the beginning of your night.
Midnight is like, I should probably start making my way to bed. That's what midnight means to me.
Exactly, right? But do you see how biologically, how different we are?
Yeah.
And that is just something that people are, that's interesting information and actionable information that you can use to change things and maybe even change the way you work the next day. Because for you to be optimally, like, you are probably full of energy between 8 p.m. and 11:30 at night. You could probably do your best work there. You're most creative, yes?
100%. And it actually works out for me because half my team is overseas and then I have to hop on calls 8, 9 p.m., but I'm still rocking, so it works for me.
Right. So for me, if I had to do something really, really important, if I had an important project and I had to do like deep thinking knowledge work in which I wanted to give it my level best, I would schedule it between 5 and 10 in the morning because I'm wide awake then. I'm very creative at that time. That's the time I want to pay attention to things. And so this is I really think that this is going to be the wave of the future, because sleeping in alignment to your biological clock, if you're able to do that, that is wonderful. In fact, I know, David introduced me. In fact, I should introduce you to him. We'll talk about, when we're not recording. But he introduced me to this young entrepreneur. He's, based out on the East Coast and, doing really, really well. And one of the main reasons he wanted to talk to me is because he was like you, a night owl. And board meetings began at 8 in the morning. And we slowly, over the next 2 years, moved those meetings to about 10 in the morning. So that he could adjust, because he was the boss. And he could adjust to all these things. And of course, there were other things that he did need to do. Because as a night owl, you know that if you started watching Netflix at 1 o'clock, or Hulu, whatever, at 12:30, you could easily be up for another 2 hours. Yes?
Yeah, only thing is I don't watch TV, but yes, in theory, yes.
Yes. But, for some people, so it would be easy for somebody who's playing video games or doing something that is distracting them to keep themselves awake. So, of course, there is the ability to shift your clock. So now I just wanted to bring this up because people don't really sleep according to their biological clocks. And And then because they don't even identify where they lie along the spectrum, they have difficulty deciding what the right thing for them to do is. And so that's number one. And number two is that for jet lag and one of the things, really the simplest way to do this would be by strategically using light and maybe even melatonin to help people adjust to the new time zone. And it's difficult for me to, the easiest way to do this would be by individual, when I work with teams, so that's what I do. In fact, I have a couple of game balls here from NFL teams because I've helped them when they've traveled to London to play there and they've been successful. Last year I did some work for the LA Lakers and when they were going to China, and then a few other, Major League Baseball teams when they were going to Tokyo, etc. to help. And that's what I'm doing with the, US soccer.
That's one of so that they can perform right when they get there and be on the ball. Yeah. It's really interesting stuff. And I guess the question that, like, as you're talking, I guess I'm starting to wonder, like, am I really a night owl, or did I just like fall into this because I had a side hustle for so long and had to stay up late and just never got out of the habit? You know what I mean? Like, I just wonder, like, how do I know if that's really me or just some routine that I've built for myself?
That's a very good question. So first of all, this predisposition is typically genetic. So either, you've inherited it from either your mother or your father. That's why I tell young adults that, it doesn't matter how far you move from your home, your parents will decide what time you go to bed because genetically that's what they do. But the second thing is that there is there are some clinically validated questionnaires you can use. So that is actually one of the things that when I'm working with teams, etc., or when I'm working with one-on-one, is to try and identify exactly where they lie on that spectrum. Because you're absolutely right. I mean, we do live in this hustle culture where it's really important to be up all the time, and you do your creative work in the evening. But my suspicion would be, having just talked to you, is that you are a night owl. But maybe you could, maybe if you put the phone away a little bit earlier, or if you put your work away, it would be easier for you to fall asleep.
To shut off. Yeah.
But on the other hand, as long as you're getting enough sleep, and if this works for you, why not?
Well, now I'm on the boss, so it doesn't matter. I could schedule my calls whenever I want them.
But that's so, and that is important because a lot of people can't do that. A lot of people, they do have difficulty, but to be able to identify that. And I think, if you think at the turn of the century when the industrial revolution came about, the way to get people to work was to set these hours. You had to be at work at 7, and then, this is where your first shift would end, and this is how it would work. And I mean, we've come a long, long way. And, work, and especially the last 2 years have definitely
100%
has taught us that we have, I always tell people that what it's taught us is that locus of control is within us. And we can, there's something that we really should try and get a handle on. And sleep is one of them. It's like it's a trainable skill.
Yeah, it really does feel like the larks have really made all the rules in terms of like what's normal. And then the night owls, I feel like, do struggle, and I think a lot of night owls become entrepreneurs. I really believe that. I feel like most entrepreneurs that I know are night owls. And I wonder if it's because they just don't fit into the work culture that's available right now.
And there may be, I don't know if it's been studied, but there is definitely, it could be true, because they say that, there are some night owls who choose to do the night shift because that's the time they're most, or I would say even the reverse would be true. So if you're totally a morning person, then the worst thing you can do to yourself is to do the night shift or the late afternoon shift, because it'll definitely eat into your sleep time, and you're not going to be sleeping in alignment to your clock, and so you're going to have the detrimental health effects from that.
Yeah. And I know me being a night owl and working in corporate for so many years, I remember like I used to, go to work and be productive, but then I would go home and do more work at like 8, 9, because like I would be on fire and like, okay, let me just get ahead so that tomorrow's great, because I'm an overachiever. And I'm sure that's tough, like having to basically work twice just because it's not in your normal rhythm, you know?
Yeah.
So definitely something to pay attention to, and you guys should think about whether you're a lark or a night owl. I want to talk about naps next.
Yes.
So what is the importance of naps? Are you a proponent of naps? What's the best way to nap? I'd love to hear your input on that.
Well, so the simplest way to approach it would be to see that if at night you don't get enough sleep, it's not a bad idea to make sure you get enough sleep, to make up for it by taking a nap. Now, there are 2-3 things about when it comes to a nap. The first thing is the timing of the length of the nap. So if, a power nap would be 15 to 25 minutes. And that's what astronauts do. It's called the NASA nap, in which, you give yourself about 25 minutes of sleep time, and it takes you about maybe a few minutes to fall asleep. And then you wake up and you've woken up from light sleep, and that's very refreshing. The second length would be about 30 to 35 minutes. Then you get a little bit of N2 sleep, which is slightly deeper sleep. That too is very refreshing. And then, of course, there's the granddaddy nap, which is what most NBA players and NHL players do, which is, they sleep for a full sleep cycle, or like a 90 or 120 minutes, in which they consume a good chunk of sleep during the day. I would say the one thing you don't want to do is you don't want to wake up from a nap between 45 minutes to an hour, because then you may wake up from deep sleep. And if you wake up from deep sleep, you're going to be groggy for a while.
Yeah. And
so that's a bad thing. Now, it's not a hard and fast rule, because if you are very, very sleep deprived, anytime you go to sleep, remember how I said your brain will try to consume as much deep sleep. So you may go into deep sleep even faster. So, but I would say still taking a nap is beneficial, because you needed to sleep, which is why you fell asleep when you were trying to take a nap. Then there's a timing, Hala. So in the mid-afternoon, there's usually a dip in our alerting signal, and from the circadian clock. So there's a time in the afternoon when we are likely to be tired. For me, it's between 1:30 and 4 p.m. For you, it may be later because you're a night owl. So that's a good time to take a nap. And the third thing is you don't want to nap too close to your bedtime. So you don't want to nap, the 3 hours before your bedtime, because then you're going to take away from that sleep drive that's going to help you fall asleep.
Yeah.
And I tell athletes, if you take a nap, be awake for at least 2 hours before the actual game, so you're not groggy at all.
Yeah, that's super helpful. I actually learned about something called a nappuccino from Daniel Pink, who is on my show. And he gave the recommendation to basically have a coffee, take a 20-minute nap, then wake up and you feel like a rock star. I've used that hack so many times when I've if I had insomnia. Sometimes we can talk about this. Sometimes I get insomnia, especially if I'm feeling anxious or excited about something. I have a very hard time sleeping. And it's the worst, because it's usually when I have some big test or the most important moments of my life, I've been sleep deprived. It's been horrible. Literally every time I had some huge thing I had to try out for, I've been I've had insomnia and just had to deal with being on no sleep. So very familiar with that terrible situation happening, which I'd love to get some input on. But anyway, what do you think about the nappuccino before we move on to insomnia and anxiety?
Well, nappuccino is fine. I mean, what's happening is that caffeine takes about 15 to maybe 30, 20, 25 minutes to take effect. And so if you take a nap in between, then you wake up from your nap and that's refreshing, and then you add caffeine to it, and that's refreshing too. So it's a win-win.
Okay, so you're all for the nappuccino.
Yes, but here's what I want to tell you about what you were talking about, the insomnia. And I want your audience to recognize the difference between sleep deprivation and insomnia that you're describing. So what we've been talking about, Hala, so far is not getting to bed on time because people are so busy. That's sleep deprivation.
Yeah.
So let me give you an example. So if I went to bed, if I flew into town and went to bed at about 1 a.m. and I had to be up at 5, that meant I'd get 4 hours of sleep. That's sleep deprivation. If, however, I got into bed at 10 p.m. and then I got really anxious about this big interview I had with Hala and did not fall asleep till about 1 o'clock in the morning, and then woke up at 5. Now, I'd still be getting about 4 hours of sleep, but that's insomnia. So insomnia is difficulty initiating and maintaining sleep despite the opportunity to do so. Because I had the opportunity to sleep. It's not as if I didn't even get to bed, but I couldn't fall asleep. And insomnia and sleep deprivation are two totally different things.
Yeah.
And it's important when somebody is being evaluated. So one of the things that I do is when I'm first talking to, a client or a patient or an athlete or, whoever I'm working with, is to get a complete history as to why they may have insomnia. So for you, Hala, if you went to bed decided to go to bed at 11 o'clock and couldn't fall asleep till about 1:30, and you said, well, I can't fall asleep, I have insomnia. Well, that's basically because you're a night owl and you try to go to sleep at a time that's not your bedtime. Or you went into bed at 1:30, but there was a lot of external noise and you were in a very noisy place, or you were in a hotel room where there was like a party going on, couldn't fall asleep. That would be more likely to be sleep deprivation because you couldn't fall asleep. But if you got into bed and you were worried and you were really anxious about the next day and you couldn't, turn your mind off and couldn't fall asleep, that's insomnia. And I tell people, having an occasional night of insomnia is not a reason to worry. So if you are a good sleeper on most nights, but on the occasional night you sleep really poorly, what does it matter? You'll sleep well, the next night. And in fact, the more, if you start paying attention to it and start stressing out about it, then it's going to become a problem. Because now then you're going to get performance anxiety about sleep. And then you're going to develop chronic insomnia. And so, it's one thing that I tell, CEOs, that if you try to get good sleep on a regular basis, occasionally before a board meeting or before a big day, if you sleep poorly, don't even worry about it. Because that's the only way to approach it. Occasional poor nights of sleep, part of life, right? That's the life we would live. So that's okay. But if it happens on a chronic basis, and if it starts interfering with your day-to-day function, then it's a problem. Then it should be.
Yeah. So let's just use me as an example. Let's just go for it because I think it will help everybody. So for me, I feel like I think it's gotten better. And to your point, I think it's gotten better because I've relaxed about my sleep a bit. But for a long time, like, especially when I was getting my MBA, I got a 4.0. I was obsessed with being number one. And every time I had a test or had to do a presentation, all I would do is just think about the answers, think about what I have to say, replay the speech in my head, and just wouldn't fall asleep. I would try so hard, but all I would do is just keep thinking and thinking and thinking about what I have to do tomorrow and how I have to perform and what I need to do. And I still did a good job somehow the next day, but almost like I said, almost every big test I ever took or every big presentation I had in my MBA, I did so on literally maybe an hour or two of sleep every time, which stinks that happened, but I still made it happen. But it was just like, I would end up like sleeping at my desk after the test, because I would be exhausted and would just have this burst of energy and then just like kind of just be dead for the rest of the day. So I'd love to hear, like, what do we do when we're in those moments when we're just so anxious and overthinking, which I think is a lot of insomnia for me at least.
Yes. And I'll tell you, for all of us, I think it's very important to build a winding down schedule. And, in addition to the alarm you have at night, in the morning, set an alarm at night that tells you, well, now's the time that you're going to start your winding down. And a part of the winding down can be a hot shower or a hot bath and any sort of relaxation. So, stretching exercises. You could do meditation.
I love what you said. I just want to point this out. An alarm clock to go to sleep.
Yes.
That's brilliant.
Yeah, not to go to sleep, but to say, well, now, let's stop with the work, right? Let's stop with, responding to emails. Let's stop doing things on the phone. Let's stop responding to things and Let's start the process of going to bed. And it's really important, and it's more important the more stressful day you've had. Because and the analogy I like to give is of an aeroplane, right? When a large aeroplane or even a small plane, when it's about to land, it doesn't just flop and land. It does all these maneuvers. It's reduces its high altitude and then, kind of slows down and then it comes and lands. That's exactly what you need to do to allow sleep to happen. And, the tools that you can use is stretching exercises, meditation, reading a book, listening to a podcast, which is something quiet and relaxing. And oftentimes that is necessary, especially in the situation you described in which you have difficulty turning your mind off. So really, you can't really command yourself to stop thinking, but you can replace it by thinking about something else. And if you can try to read, or you can try to do other things that'll take your mind off, and that'll allow sleep to happen. And, also to have a practice of either meditation or mindfulness, especially during the day, is a good idea. Because, if you're meditating, you become really focused, your mind clears, you become very calm, you're very collected. And you want to be able to use that in those stressful situations, trying to fall asleep. And there's this thing so with this altered state of meditation, you have this state in which you're, the circuitry of your brain is kind of altered, in which you're really focused and relaxed. And you want to be able to use that. It becomes almost like a trait that you use at night, so that if you do wake up, the same way that you're looking at during the day, how meditation or mindfulness teachers used to be non-judgmental and, relaxed, you want to be less judgmental about your sleep too. And not get mad at yourself that I'm not sleeping, not looking at the clock, etc. So those are all things that one can do to help you relax. And like I said, occasionally getting a poor night of sleep is perfectly fine. If it becomes a chronic thing, speak to your primary care doctor. There are, the American Academy of Sleep Medicine, and there are a lot of behavioral sleep medicine specialists, and all they do is, use clinically validated therapy.
Yeah. I mean, I grew out of it, and I think it's to your point. I was so fixated on, I can't sleep. I can never sleep. I have insomnia. And for 2 years, I just felt like I always had insomnia. Yes. Now I have interview Matthew McConaughey and have no trouble sleeping. Yes. It makes no sense. I'm like, why was I so nervous about my MBA presentation, but I can interview Matthew McConaughey now and get fine sleep.
And that points towards, you're wiser too. Yeah. Right. And you're used to this. These are things that have happened and have come with time to you. This is really interesting. I can't tell you how often I start working with people, and we have our first meeting, and I take a sleep-wake history, give them some pointers, and they're like, "I'm sleeping so well after talking to you," because that stress about thinking that their sleep is really bad, and judging their own sleep, or being really angry about the fact that they're unable to sleep while everybody else is sleeping well. And there's nothing as aggravating as, turning around and looking at your bed partner who's fast asleep and maybe snoring while you're
snoring or something.
To see how irritating that can be. So it's a process.
Cool. Well, I feel like this has been such a valuable interview. I've had so much fun talking about sleep. Who knew sleep could be so interesting? Let's talk about your World Series ring, because I'd love for you to flash that up. Yes. Show us what that looks like, and then tell us what you did to earn that ring. What are some of the things that you did with that team?
So I worked in 2019. I worked with the Washington Nationals, and I did the same thing that I actually do with most teams, in which it's just sleep education, screening, talking to them on an individual basis, and really helping them with their travel. So that year, the Washington Nationals won the only World Series they've had in their franchisee. And they won all their away games because we really worked hard on their schedule, making sure that they were well rested when they showed up while they were playing. And it was pretty darn amazing.
That is amazing. Yes. I mean, what a notch on your belt to say that you have that. So the last question that I ask all my guests, and this is your opportunity to give us any sort of gem that you haven't really uncovered yet, is what is your secret to profiting in life?
I would say having genuine relationships. The kind of work that you and I do, Hala, it's all about building relationships. Like I said, I have never advertised. It's always when I work with somebody, I give it my level best, and then maybe go beyond, because I know that it's only and it's very rewarding, and I know that it'll somehow it'll come back, and even if it does, it's because it's rewarding. It's worth it.
Yeah. I think that's really, really great insight. I love that. And where can our listeners go learn more about you and everything that you do?
So I do have a website. It's meetasinghmd.com, and I'll send it to you so we can post links. I'm on LinkedIn as Meeta Singh MD. And then I do have, I'm on Twitter as AthleteSleepMD1. I'm on Instagram as AthleteSleepMD. That's it. I'm thinking about starting a YouTube page. I haven't done that as yet. I probably need you, Hala, the best.
Yeah, we got to talk. But yeah, I will stick all of your social links in there. Dr. Meeta, this was a wonderful interview. I think that we explored so many different topics about sleep that we haven't heard before yet on this podcast. So I appreciate all your time and your wisdom. Thank you so much. Thanks for listening to Young and Profiting Podcast. If you enjoyed the show, please write us a review or comment on your favorite platform. Nothing makes us happier than reading your reviews. We'd love to hear what you think about the show. And don't forget to share this podcast with your friends, family, and on social media. I always repost, reshare, and support those who support us. You can find me on Instagram at YAP with Hala or LinkedIn. Just search for my name. It's Hala Taha. Big thanks to the YAP team as always. This is Hala signing off.